You know what time it is.
Dun da da da! Bitch pudding! Blam!
I'm the baby, gotta love. Don't you wish there were more of me? Daddy, mother, brother, sister, I'm the greatest baby if we exist. I'm the baby, and you gotta love. I'm the baby.
I'm a little late with this one, but to compensate, I'm going to tie today's video in with my channel theme, being that empathy and conservatism are skills you need to exercise to use properly. Which brings us to today's easy topic, abortion. Oh boy, I can't wait to see what Dennis, I think about being a serial killer and say this publicly, but I don't do it because the 10 Commandments and nothing else, Prager has to say about that. I'm going to spoil it for you though. Dennis doesn't actually address the primary legal question behind abortion. Go figure. We'll get to that. But before we begin, does anyone know what's up with this new video format Prager's using? Like, we're Ethan Van Sciver and we're shooting the screen with the camera? Like, I can see the play bar in the frame down here. What the hell, Dennis? Did you accidentally copyright claim your own videos, so now you need to upload them in 4x3? But let's get to the meat of the video, which amounts to roughly a bite of dollar store beef jerky. It starts by playing a video I don't recognize. Cutting out what Prager asserts is the core point, that the woman owns the uterus, therefore pregnancy is her choice. So Dennis jumps in to pivot the conversation to whether it is moral to abort a fetus. Because Prager loves to use non sequiturs like this video's format is going to be a mess, but here goes. What is meant by the left when they say my body, my choice is an allusion to bodily integrity, which is a rather catch-all term for the inviolability of an individual's physical body. How this varies country to country within legal systems varies, but it is generally recognized as an international human right. As we are assuming Prager is targeting an American audience, we'll focus on their specifics. In the United States, bodily integrity is not itself so named in the Constitution as it is in places like Ireland, but it is repeatedly reinforced in case law in the Supreme Court. The three primary rights enumerated by the Supreme Court come from Griswold versus Connecticut, where the court ruled a woman's body is not her husband's property, Roe v. Wade, the most famous, which enshrined the right to privacy in obtaining medical treatment, and McFall versus Shimp, where the court determined that a person cannot be forced to donate tissue against their will. As an aside, Roe v. Wade is often remembered as the abortion case, but its application is much more generalist. For example, your doctor can't gossip about your erectile dysfunction with your boss because of Roe v. Wade. Further, and more important to us today, Roe v. Wade will likely be the bedrock of digital privacy laws. Data analytics can determine if a woman is pregnant before a pregnancy test shows a positive result. Your employers use that information, for a price, to determine who gets hired and promoted. They aren't, of course, sharing any medical data. They're just making educated guesses that happen to be right more than 90% of the time. But any legislation we adopt in the future to prevent your employer from prying into your personal life through a data analytics company will use Roe v. Wade as its cornerstone, and it's important to protect that. That tangent aside, I want to focus on the third case, McFall v. Shimp, which really should be the most important when you're arguing about abortion, to my mind. Let us say I am babysitting my 4-year-old nephew. My sister has entrusted his care to me for some hours. Let us say I allow him to play on the roof. Let us say I push him off the roof. My nephew now needs to find medical treatment. He is taken to the hospital. Now let us say, for the sake of this argument, that my family has a rare blood condition, which means my nephew, who now needs a blood transfusion to save his life, has only one available match, and that match is me. No one can compel me to donate that blood if I don't want to. This is the law in the United States, because, as you've put together, if you've been paying attention, I have bodily integrity. Am I responsible for my nephew's current condition? Absolutely. If he dies, in fact, I will probably be charged with manslaughter at the least. Not only that, but as his babysitter, I had a duty of care that I neglected. But even if I am found guilty of those crimes, I cannot be compelled to cooperate in donating my blood or body parts. It does not matter how responsible I am for the current situation. That is the law that the Supreme Court laid down in McFall v. Shimp. We even go so far as to protect this right for the dead. The desecration of a grave is a crime, because even when dead, our physical bodies are our property, to be treated with respect and possess their own limited liberty. If you don't agree to be an organ donor when alive, we assume you aren't. And no matter how good a shape your kidneys or heart might be in, we do not harvest them unless you gave your explicit consent before you died. Now, a thinking conservative would look at these principles, which, again, are the supreme law of the land, and would ask, why is it different when the organ involved is a uterus and not bone marrow? Alright, let's get to Dennis's argument bit by bit.
Is ending the life of a human fetus moral? Let's begin with this question. Does the human fetus have any value and any rights? Now, it's a scientific fact that a human fetus is human life. Those who argue that the human fetus has no rights say that a fetus is not a person. But even if you believe that, it doesn't mean the fetus has no intrinsic value or no rights.
So, first, Dennis, no one is saying that a fetus has no rights. I'll rephrase. No one reasonable is saying that a fetus has no rights. But even if the fetus is a person, as we've established in case law, their right to life does not supersede my right to bodily integrity, no matter how responsible I am. The only difference here is that if the fetus is forced to sink or swim without my donation of my body's tissues, in 100% of cases the fetus will sink, so to speak. That is, before a certain stage of development, but I don't want to get ahead of the video.
There are many living beings that are not persons that have both value and rights. Dogs and other animals, for example.
Dennis has little pictures of animals in this bit. Aren't they cute? Except, in almost every legal code I can think of, human rights are afforded more priority over animal rights. For example, if a dog jumps on you to attack you, no park service is going to prosecute you for defending your life and shooting it dead, because as a human being, your life has more value than an animal. At the same time, if you are an asshole who leans over a fence and shoots a dog for barking too loudly, you will be punished with animal cruelty and likely whatever other crimes we can charge you for with firing your weapon in a residential area, because the dog's life does have some intrinsic value, even to our legal code. If you want to bring animal rights into this, I'm sure Dennis Prager isn't suggesting that we stop eating meat. I wonder who has ever raised that as a talking point in the past. I wonder. No one's saying that cows have an equal right to live as humans. Obviously, you still get hamburgers. Likewise, a fetus does have inherent value. This is why anyone who kills a pregnant woman is often also charged with a second murder, that of the fetus, if that fetus could have feasibly sustained itself before its death. You may remember a man named Scott Peterson, who was convicted of the first-degree murder of his wife Lacey and the second-degree murder of his unborn child in 2004. Though, for the sticklers, the reason the death of his unborn child has the lesser degree has to do with the target of the murder, Lacey. He wanted Lacey to die. Connor, that is the unborn baby, died as a byproduct of his actions, not as a goal. The same first and second degrees would apply if your target was the attached living kidney to another person who died as a result of the murder. Same deal. The difference between this and the bodily integrity issue is that Lacey did not give her consent to be murdered. Obviously, she did not want to terminate the pregnancy early, so the continued viability of the fetus was taken as a given fact. And this isn't the only instance, but it is perhaps the most high profile of the last 20 years. Fuck, I'm old.
A living being doesn't have to be a person in order to have intrinsic moral value and rights. When challenged with this argument, people usually change the subject to the rights of the mother, meaning the right of a mother to end her fetus's life under any circumstance for any reason and at any time in her pregnancy. Is that moral?
Again, Dennis the Lettuce, by side-skirting the issue of bodily integrity, has completely voided the foundation of his, let's charitably call it, an argument. There is no universal neutral arbiter of morality, not even God, because the Bible usually defines different sides of an argument depending on which chapter you're in. Same for the Quran. Murder is bad for Cain, but good for Moses, that sort of thing. Which, of course, is the entire point of philosophy and ethical systems, to establish a relative hierarchy with which we can weigh those choices. Each person must weigh, for themselves, how far the scales tip for the right of the mother's bodily integrity and the fetus's right to life. And this is the most bare bones I can make this argument. This is just the very center pit of this tangled web of an issue. But Prager doesn't do that. Instead, he pretends like liberty doesn't exist. He presents one side, that of the fetus, and hopes that if he pretends that the mother doesn't have constitutional liberties, that they won't exist. Like it's a fucking leprechaun and saying its name will give it power.
Only if a pregnant woman doesn't want to give birth do many people regard the fetus as worthless. Now, does that make sense? It doesn't seem to. Either a human fetus has worth, or it doesn't.
Again, it's repeating itself at this point, but I want to drill it home to you that Dennis is scared of American liberty. And again, I am simply laying out these two liberties, the fetus's right to life on one hand, and the mother's right to bodily autonomy on the other, as the most basic framework of the debate. A real ethical discussion, such as one a pregnant girl might have with her lover or parents, would include other strands that wrap around these two cores, such as what quality of life can they provide this baby, and is that a life worth living for them and for it? And if it looks like a life of struggle and poverty, is that not an act of mercy to deny it sapience? These questions are, naturally, way too complicated to fit into a Prager video, but they do exist and make the question grayer. I'm not ignoring it because I don't think they are important, but only because I am arguing at the level Dennis the Crevice is setting the terms.
And this is moral argument number 2. On what moral grounds does the mother alone decide a fetus's worth?
We've already covered this, but just to reiterate, McFall v. Shimp, Dennis, is the moral grounds on which the mother alone is allowed to decide.
We certainly don't do that with regard to a newborn child.
The difference, of course, that an unborn child cannot self-sustain itself. We could induce labor on a woman 3 months pregnant who wants an abortion. The fetus will absolutely die, but we could do it. Sink or swim, bitch. This isn't no welfare state. The difference between that and a newborn is that the baby can self-sustain. It can breathe and eat on its own, within reason, of course. And in instances where a woman who is, say, 8 months pregnant is in a car accident and it looks like the fetus might be in danger, if it can be done, doctors will often deliver the baby early if it will complicate the mother's recovery to a dangerous level. It will be hell for the baby and its parents for several months as it tries to develop its lungs outside the womb and so forth. But we have the technology as such that we often risk early deliveries if there's a reasonable chance of saving both lives.
It is society, not the mother or the father, that determines whether a newborn child has worth and a right to live. So the question is, why should that be different before the human being is born? Why does one person, a mother, get to determine whether that being has any right to live?
I just want to point out how ridiculous it is that Dennis Prager is now claiming that it takes a village to raise a child. In fact, let's be real funny about it. This is an article Dennis wrote for the National Review Online in 2013, back when PragerU was a twinkle in his eye before he ejaculated all over a bald eagle and his YouTube channel sprung up out of the foam. I've provided a link to the full text, but I'd like to read this passage in full to you. Villages do indeed raise children, and when the village shares parents' values, the parents don't have to do the difficult work of inculcating those values. But the village, American society, has radically changed. Which brings us to the second reason. Virtually every institution outside the home has been captured by people with left-wing values, specifically the media, television and movies, and the schools, first the universities and now high schools. In the 1960s and 1970s, American parents were blindsided. Their children came home from college with values that thoroughly opposed those of their parents. First off, it is amusing to think of people born in the 1950s, by Dennis's math, going to freshman year at the uni in the 2010s. If it was already too late by the 1960s, Dennis, why aren't you in lockstep? Unless you're a 90-year-old man. Second, you might say, well, how does this regard what was said about abortion? Seems like Dennis does believe society has a say in raising children. Well, the second part of this series, which I will also link you, is entirely about how single parents, or single parental units, I should say, should fight the village and make them immune to brainwashing. It's interesting how, when it comes to violating a mother's liberty, Dennis Prager is all about the village. But if your adult child has some slight misgivings about the idea of American exceptionalism, Dennis is ready to burn the village to the fucking ground.
No one ever asks a pregnant woman, "How's your body?" when asking about the fetus. People ask, "How's the baby?"
Actually, there is someone who will be asking the mother about her body, her doctor. Her doctor will then run a few tests and tell her how the baby is doing. Oh, sure, the mother has hunches, but it's the medical professional who will set the record straight, and often through the mother's own body cues, unusual pains and the like, that perhaps shouldn't be there.
Moral argument number 4. Virtually everyone agrees that the moment the baby comes out of the womb, killing the baby is murder. But deliberately killing it a few months before birth is considered no more morally problematic than extracting a tooth.
We've already established that as long as a baby can maintain bodily autonomy, doctors will try to save its life. I'm also going to take exception to this "a few months before it is born." Humans gestate over the course of 9 months, Dennis. Do try to keep up. I know you've probably never seen a vagina, but the entire pregnancy is a few months. Less than a year. There are children who will be born on Election Day in 2020 whose parents haven't met yet. So yes, a designation of a few months in one direction or the other matters a hell of a lot.
Aren't there instances in which just about everyone, even among those who are pro-choice, would acknowledge that an abortion might not be moral?
This is a much more wishy-washy point. I've told this channel before about my political career in the past. All the Republicans I rolled with, yes, including the Tea Partiers, were pro-choice. And in fact, most believed that abortion was immoral, but they didn't believe in sacrificing liberty to prevent one. Plenty of people do exist who think that abortion is both a lamentable act and also think the government should not overreach to squash it, like they've so effectively squashed the drug trade over the past 50 years. Dennis then gives us examples. Is it moral to abort a girl or not a boy because you prefer boys, or a gay fetus because you want a straight child? Now, if Dennis were talking about morality here, these would be interesting questions, but because Dennis is already drawing the conclusions from his hypotheticals, not inviting discussion, we're forced to understand that he means his arguments in the more we must take practical action side of things. Because here is the bottom line. You might have noticed that I've constructed this video and my rebuttal to Dennis the Crevice on the assumption that a fetus is a person. I am assuming his postulate to be true, but that doesn't stop all those other factors from existing either. I can get into the broader practical applications, like how Romania fared when abortion was illegal, how dangerous back alleys can be, and is it not safer to do in the open what might kill someone in the dark? I could get into all the complexities of rape and incest, but I'm not going to swallow your bait, Dennis, because that would be a non sequitur. They are components of legislation and law-giving, sure, but that's not the core of what you're asking here. No, I'm addressing your point directly. Even with all these things, if I accept your argument as true, I, in my infinite conservative wisdom, still beat you.
Blam!